The world knew him as a billionaire, but that night, one stranger saw him as just a person. Ethan Whitmore had spent most of his life surrounded by people who knew his name before they knew his heart. At 46 years old, he was the founder and CEO of Whitmore Global, a company valued at billions of dollars. His decisions influenced markets, his schedule was planned down to the minute, and every room he entered changed because of his presence. But behind the polished suits, private meetings, and glass offices high above the city, Ethan carried a quiet feeling he could never explain. He had everything people dreamed of having. Yet somehow, something important was missing. On a rainy evening in Chicago, Ethan stepped away from the world that always watched him. He was dressed simply, without the attention that followed his usual appearance. For once, he wanted a few moments where nobody treated him like a powerful executive. The rain fell steadily against the sidewalks as people hurried past with umbrellas and busy thoughts. Almost everyone was focused on their own lives. Almost everyone ignored the man standing alone near a small neighborhood cafe. But one person noticed. Claire Bennett was finishing a long workday. At 34 years old, she was a single mother doing everything she could to create a stable life for her young child. Her days were filled with responsibilities. She worked hard, managed every expense carefully, and rarely had time for herself. She did not have luxury. She did not have influence. But she had something that never depended on money: compassion. As Claire walked toward the cafe entrance, she noticed Ethan struggling with a small injury on his hand from an ordinary accident earlier that evening. To everyone else, he was just another stranger having a difficult moment. Claire did not know his name. She did not know his company. She did not know that the man standing in front of her had built an empire. She only saw someone who needed help. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Ethan looked surprised. It was a simple question, but he had not heard it asked with genuine concern in a long time. People usually asked how his company was doing. They asked about investments, opportunities, and decisions. They rarely asked how he was doing as a person. Claire offered a small first aid kit she carried in her bag and carefully helped him take care of his hand. There was no expectation in her eyes. No curiosity about who he was. No hidden request waiting behind her kindness. She simply wanted to help. Ethan watched her quietly. He was used to people approaching him because of what he owned. But this woman had no idea who he was, and that made the moment feel different. "Thank you," he said. Claire smiled. Anyone would have done the same. But Ethan knew that was not true. Many people had walked past. Many people had looked away. She had chosen to stop. When they parted ways that evening, Ethan returned to his world of wealth and responsibility. Claire returned to her small home, her child, and her ordinary routine. Neither of them knew that this brief encounter would become the beginning of a story neither could have imagined. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness reaches the places where money never can. The next morning, Ethan Whitmore returned to the world he had built, but something about the previous evening stayed with him. The busy streets, the endless meetings, and the constant attention from people around him all felt slightly different. He kept remembering one simple moment. A stranger had looked at him and asked if he was okay. Not as a CEO. Not as a billionaire. Just as a person. For years, Ethan had become accustomed to conversations that started with his achievements. People mentioned his company, his investments, and his influence before they ever considered who he was behind the success. But Claire Bennett had known nothing about those things. She had seen a person having a difficult moment and responded with kindness. Inside the headquarters of Whitmore Global, Ethan sat in his private office overlooking the city. The room was impressive, filled with awards, business achievements, and reminders of everything he had accomplished. But that morning, none of those things captured his attention. He looked at his hand, remembering the woman who had helped him without expecting anything in return. Who does that anymore? He quietly wondered. Ethan knew that kindness existed, but he rarely experienced it without a reason attached. Later that day, his assistant, Olivia Parker, noticed that something about him seemed different. Ethan was usually focused on schedules, decisions, and company goals. But now he seemed thoughtful. "Is everything okay?" Olivia asked. Ethan paused for a moment before answering. "I met someone yesterday." Olivia smiled slightly, expecting a business connection. "A new partner?" Ethan shook his head. "No. Just someone who reminded me of something important." He did not explain further. He was not even sure how to describe it himself. Meanwhile, Claire Bennett continued with her normal routine. Her morning started early, as always. She prepared breakfast for her child, checked her schedule, and made sure everything was ready before leaving home. Her apartment was modest, but it was filled with warmth. Family photographs decorated the walls. Small reminders of happy memories filled the shelves. Claire did not have a perfect life, but she had created a home built on love and stability. At work, Claire carried the same kindness she had shown Ethan. She helped coworkers when they had questions. She listened when someone needed encouragement. She treated people with respect, regardless of their position. To Claire, these actions were normal. She never thought of herself as extraordinary. She simply believed that everyone deserved compassion. But across the city, Ethan found himself thinking about her more often than he expected. He wanted to know who she was. Not because he wanted to reward her. Not because he wanted to prove his generosity. He wanted to understand how someone with so few advantages could carry so much warmth. Ethan asked Olivia to quietly find information about Claire using only public records. He wanted to respect her privacy, but he also wanted to know more about the person who had created such a strong impression. What he discovered surprised him. Claire was not someone searching for opportunities or attention. She was simply a hardworking mother who had spent years putting others before herself. As Ethan read more about her life, he realized something that challenged everything he believed about success. The person with the least power in the room could sometimes hold the greatest influence. And for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore wanted to learn from someone who had never tried to teach him anything. The more Ethan Whitmore learned about Claire Bennett, the more questions he had about the world he thought he understood. He had spent years surrounded by people who measured everything by results, numbers, and achievements. But Claire's life showed him a different kind of success. It was not displayed in expensive buildings or celebrated in headlines. It appeared in small moments that most people never noticed. Ethan discovered that Claire often arrived early at work because she wanted to finish her responsibilities before spending the evening with her child. He learned that she helped coworkers even when she had her own challenges to manage. He learned that she never spoke about her struggles as if they were reasons to give up. Instead, she treated every difficult day as another opportunity to move forward. For Ethan, this was unexpected. He had met many successful people throughout his career. He had negotiated with executives, investors, and industry leaders. But very few people carried the quiet strength that Claire had. Meanwhile, Claire had no idea that the stranger from the rainy evening was thinking about her story. She continued living the same simple routine. Every morning, she prepared her child for the day, made sure everything was ready, and went to work with determination. She did not dream of becoming famous. She did not hope for a sudden change in her circumstances. Her dream was much smaller and much more meaningful. She wanted her child to grow up feeling safe, loved, and supported. One afternoon, Ethan visited a local community event connected to one of Whitmore Global's charitable programs. He was there to review the company's efforts, but something caught his attention. A volunteer was helping organize supplies for families in need. When Ethan looked closer, he realized it was Claire. She was smiling as she worked, speaking kindly to everyone around her. She had no idea he was watching. Ethan stood quietly for a moment. He expected to see someone who had been changed by hardship. Instead, he saw someone who had allowed hardship to strengthen her compassion. After the event, Ethan approached her. Claire recognized him immediately and smiled. "Your hand healed," she said. Ethan looked at his hand and laughed softly. "Yes, thanks to you." Claire waved away the compliment. "It was a small thing." Ethan looked at her seriously. Maybe to you. But small things are not always small to the person receiving them. Claire did not know how to respond. She was not used to hearing that her actions mattered so much. Their conversation was brief, but Ethan noticed something important. Claire never tried to impress him. She never asked about his company or his wealth. She treated him exactly the same way she had before. That honesty stayed with him. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his office and looked at the city lights below. He thought about how many people had entered his life because of his success. Many wanted opportunities. Many wanted connections. Many wanted something from him. But Claire wanted nothing. She had simply offered kindness when she saw someone who needed it. Ethan realized that was the reason the moment mattered so much. In a world where almost everything had a price, Claire had given him something that could not be bought. A genuine human connection. And without realizing it, she had started changing the way a billionaire saw the world. The days following Ethan Whitmore's second meeting with Claire Bennett felt different from any ordinary week. Nothing around him had changed. The same executives walked through the halls of Whitmore Global. The same meetings filled his calendar. The same city moved quickly outside his office windows. But inside Ethan, something had shifted. He started noticing things he had ignored for years. He noticed employees who stayed late because they felt responsible for their teams. He noticed the quiet effort behind every successful project. He noticed that every number in a report represented real people with real lives. Before meeting Claire, Ethan believed leadership was about making the right decisions at the right time. Now he was beginning to understand that leadership was also about understanding the people affected by those decisions. One morning, Ethan sat in a meeting with his senior executives discussing company performance. The conversation focused on growth, expansion, and future investments. Everything sounded familiar. But then Ethan asked a question that surprised everyone in the room. "How are our employees really doing?" The room became quiet. A few executives exchanged uncertain looks. They were prepared to discuss financial results, not personal experiences. Ethan noticed their hesitation. Years earlier, he might have moved on quickly. But now he wanted a real answer. He wanted to know if the people building his company felt valued. Later that day, Ethan asked his assistant Olivia Parker to arrange a series of private conversations with employees from different departments. He wanted to listen without a presentation, without a prepared speech, and without the distance created by his position. Meanwhile, Claire continued her normal routine, unaware that her simple kindness had started influencing decisions inside one of the largest companies in the country. She spent her days working, caring for her child, and managing the responsibilities of everyday life. She never imagined that someone as powerful as Ethan would remember a brief encounter with her. To Claire, helping him had been the natural thing to do. Nothing more. One evening, Ethan visited the same small cafe where he and Claire had first met. He sat near the window, watching people come and go. The place was quiet and ordinary, but it represented something important to him. It reminded him of a moment when nobody cared about his wealth or position. He remembered how comfortable he felt being treated like a regular person. For the first time in a long time, Ethan understood how rare that feeling was. The next day, he invited Claire to have coffee with him again. When she arrived, she smiled politely and sat across from him. Ethan thanked her once more, but Claire looked slightly confused. "You keep thanking me," she said. "But I only helped someone who needed help." Ethan smiled. "That is exactly why I keep remembering it." Their conversation continued naturally. Ethan asked about her life, her hopes, and the challenges she faced. Claire spoke honestly but never complained. She talked about wanting a better future for her child and creating a home filled with kindness. Ethan listened carefully. He realized Claire was not powerful because of what she owned. She was powerful because of what she gave. When they finished their conversation, Ethan walked back into his world with a new understanding. He had spent years building an empire, but Claire had reminded him of something much more valuable. A person's greatest impact was not measured by how much they had. It was measured by how much good they could create for others. The conversation between Ethan Whitmore and Claire Bennett stayed in his mind long after they left the cafe. It was not because she had offered him advice or tried to change his life. In fact, she had done the opposite. She had simply spoken honestly, without knowing the influence her words would have. That was what made them meaningful. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was seeing the world from a different perspective. He returned to Whitmore Global the next morning with a new sense of purpose. As he walked through the company headquarters, he looked beyond the polished floors, modern offices, and impressive achievements. He looked at the people. He noticed the employees who arrived early, the assistants who kept everything organized, and the teams who worked quietly behind every major success. These were the people who made the company what it was. Yet Ethan realized he had spent too much time focusing on results, and not enough time understanding the people creating them. During a leadership meeting, Ethan presented a new idea. He wanted to create programs that supported employees beyond their professional roles. He wanted better communication between leadership and staff. He wanted employees to feel respected, not just evaluated. Some executives listened carefully, while others appeared uncertain. Richard Hayes, one of the company's longest-serving leaders, looked thoughtful. He respected Ethan, but he had spent decades believing that business decisions should be based only on efficiency and growth. "Ethan, I understand the intention," Richard said. "But do you think emotions should influence major business decisions?" Ethan paused before answering. In the past, he might have dismissed the question. But now he considered it carefully. "I think understanding people is one of the most important parts of making good decisions," Ethan replied. "A company is not only built by strategies. It is built by the people who carry those strategies forward." The room became quiet. It was not the answer many expected from Ethan Whitmore. Meanwhile, Claire continued her own journey without knowing any of this was happening. Her days remained busy. She balanced work, parenting, and the responsibilities of everyday life. She still worried about bills, schedules, and the future. But she never allowed those worries to change the way she treated others. One afternoon, a coworker thanked Claire for helping during a difficult day. Claire smiled and said, "Everyone needs support sometimes. We all have moments when a little kindness helps." Those simple words reflected the same belief Ethan was beginning to understand. Small actions could create meaningful change. As the weeks passed, Ethan's new approach slowly started influencing Whitmore Global. Managers began having more open conversations with their teams. Employees felt more comfortable sharing ideas. People started feeling like they were part of something bigger than their job descriptions. Ethan watched these changes carefully. He knew the company was improving, but he also knew the journey had only begun. One evening, Ethan stood in his office looking at the city lights. Years ago, he would have measured progress by profits, expansion, and recognition. Now he measured it differently. He thought about trust. He thought about connection. He thought about the people who helped build his success. And he thought about Claire, the woman who had never tried to influence him, but somehow changed the way he saw everything. Ethan had spent his life searching for the next great achievement. But now he understood that sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from the smallest moments. A simple act of kindness had opened the door to a completely different way of leading. The changes inside Whitmore Global continued slowly, but Ethan Whitmore could feel the difference every day. The company was still focused on growth, innovation, and success, but the atmosphere had started to change. Employees who once avoided speaking during meetings began sharing their ideas. Managers who once focused only on deadlines began paying more attention to the people behind the work. It was not a sudden transformation. It was a series of small choices that created a larger impact. Ethan understood that real change was not created by one announcement or one decision. It was created by consistency. Every day, he tried to lead differently. He listened more. He asked questions instead of assuming he already had the answers. He made time for conversations that had nothing to do with profits or business plans. To many people inside the company, Ethan seemed like a different person. But Ethan knew the truth. He was not becoming someone new. He was remembering something he had forgotten. Before success changed his world, he had once understood the importance of people. Somewhere along the way, he became focused only on achievement. Claire Bennett had reminded him of what truly mattered. Meanwhile, Claire continued living a life far away from the attention surrounding Ethan's company. She still woke up early every morning, prepared her child for the day, and worked hard to create stability. She never searched for recognition. She never expected anyone to notice her actions. When people asked how she stayed positive despite challenges, she simply smiled and said that everyone was carrying something they could not see. That belief stayed with Ethan. One afternoon, Ethan visited a department meeting where employees were discussing ways to improve their workplace. Instead of standing at the front as the most powerful person in the room, he sat among them and listened. He heard stories about employees balancing careers and family responsibilities. He heard about challenges people rarely shared in professional settings. He realized that many problems could have been solved earlier if leaders had simply taken the time to listen. After the meeting, Richard Hayes approached Ethan. The senior executive looked thoughtful. "I have worked here for many years," Richard said. "I have seen many strategies come and go. But I have never seen employees respond this way." Ethan smiled. "Because this is not just a strategy. It is about people." Richard nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand what Ethan had learned. Later that evening, Ethan called Claire. He wanted to thank her again, but he also wanted to tell her something important. "You should know that what you did mattered," he said. Claire laughed softly. "Ethan, I only helped someone who needed help." "That is exactly why it mattered," he replied. "You did not know who I was. You had no reason to expect anything from me. You helped because it was the right thing to do." Claire became quiet for a moment. She never thought of her actions as something special. To her, kindness was simply part of being human. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his office and looked at the city below. He thought about all the things he had spent his life building. The company. The reputation. The success. They were important, but they were not everything. The greatest achievement was not creating something that people admired. It was creating something that helped people feel valued. Ethan Whitmore had spent years trying to change the world through business. But a single moment with a kind stranger had taught him that the biggest changes often begin with one person choosing to care. The transformation inside Whitmore Global continued, but Ethan Whitmore knew that every meaningful change would eventually face questions. For years, the company had operated under a familiar formula. Decisions were made quickly, results were measured carefully, and success was defined by numbers. Ethan had built the company with that mindset. It had taken him from a small idea to one of the most respected businesses in the country. But now he was asking a different question. What if success was not only about what a company achieved, but also about how it treated the people who made those achievements possible? Not everyone understood his new direction. Some executives believed Ethan was becoming too focused on emotions and personal connections. They worried that spending more time listening to employees would slow down the company's progress. During one leadership meeting, several executives discussed the changes with uncertainty. Richard Hayes listened carefully before sharing his thoughts. "I understand the goal," he said. "But we have to be careful. A company still needs strong decisions and clear priorities." Ethan nodded. He appreciated the honesty. The old version of himself might have seen that comment as a challenge to his authority. But the new Ethan saw it as an important conversation. "You are right," Ethan replied. "A company needs strong decisions. But strong decisions should come from understanding the people they affect." The room became quiet. His answer was not about rejecting the past. It was about improving the future. Meanwhile, Claire Bennett remained unaware of the discussions happening inside Whitmore Global. Her life continued at its own pace. She worked hard, cared for her child, and handled each day with the same patience she had always shown. She never believed she had done anything extraordinary. When Ethan mentioned the changes happening because of her influence, she always reminded him that she was just being herself. One weekend, Ethan invited Claire to visit the company headquarters. He wanted to show her how much had changed. Claire felt nervous when she entered the impressive building. She had never imagined walking through the offices of a company this large. Employees greeted Ethan with respect, but Claire noticed something different. They also greeted each other with warmth. The environment felt less distant than she expected. Ethan showed her different areas of the company and explained the new programs being created to support employees. Claire listened carefully and offered simple thoughts. She suggested that leaders should always remember the people behind every role and every responsibility. Ethan smiled because it was the same message he had heard from her since the beginning. Later, as they walked through the building, Claire noticed employees working together and supporting one another. She looked at Ethan and said, "It seems like people feel more connected here." Ethan smiled. "That is what we are trying to build." For a moment, Ethan realized how much had changed. A few months earlier, he would have shown Claire the company's achievements. He would have pointed out growth numbers and business milestones. Now he was showing her something different. He was showing her people. That evening, Ethan returned home thinking about the journey that brought him here. He still had challenges ahead. He still had decisions to make. But he no longer felt like he had to carry everything alone. Because he finally understood that the strongest leaders were not the ones who stood above everyone else. They were the ones who knew how to stand beside others. The story of Ethan Whitmore and the changes inside his company began reaching more people than he expected. Employees started noticing the difference. Conversations that once felt formal became more open. Meetings that once focused only on targets and deadlines became opportunities to understand the people behind the work. But while many inside Whitmore Global welcomed the new direction, some still wondered why Ethan had changed so suddenly. They saw the results, but they did not know the reason behind them. They did not know about the rainy evening when a woman who knew nothing about his wealth had stopped to help him. They did not know about the simple act of kindness that reminded Ethan what leadership was truly about. Ethan never shared the story publicly. To him, it was not about receiving credit. It was about respecting the person who had inspired the change. Claire Bennett continued living quietly, unaware of how much influence she had created. She focused on her family, her work, and the small moments that made everyday life meaningful. She never imagined that a few minutes of kindness could reach the highest levels of a major company. One afternoon, Ethan invited Claire to attend a community event organized by Whitmore Global. The event focused on supporting local families and creating opportunities for people facing difficult circumstances. Claire agreed to attend because she believed in the purpose behind it, not because of Ethan's position. When she arrived, she saw something that surprised her. The company leaders were not standing far away from the community. They were listening, helping, and speaking with people directly. Ethan walked beside her through the event, greeting employees and community members. Claire watched him carefully. She noticed that the man she had first met seemed different. He was still confident and successful, but there was a new sense of humility in the way he interacted with others. "You really changed," Claire said quietly. Ethan looked at her and smiled. "I think I finally remembered who I wanted to be." Claire did not know how much those words meant. Ethan had spent years trying to become the most successful person in every room. Now he wanted to become the kind of person who made every room better. During the event, Ethan introduced several employees who had helped develop the company's new community programs. He did not take all the attention for himself. Instead, he recognized the people around him. Claire noticed this immediately. She understood that real leadership was not about being the center of everything. It was about helping others shine. Later that evening, Ethan and Claire sat outside the event location, watching families leave with smiles and gratitude. The city lights reflected in the distance, creating a peaceful moment between two people from completely different worlds. "I still do not understand why you remember that night so much," Claire said. Ethan looked thoughtful. "Because that night, you gave me something I had forgotten existed." Claire smiled gently. What was that? Ethan answered. A reminder that people mattered before everything else. For years, Ethan had searched for ways to build a greater legacy. He thought it would come from bigger achievements, larger companies, and more success. But now he understood something different. A true legacy was not only about what people remembered you for. It was about how people felt. Because you were there. And somewhere along the way, a single mother who believed she had done something ordinary had changed the heart of a billionaire. The days after the community event brought a new sense of peace to Ethan Whitmore. For the first time in years, he was not chasing the next achievement. He was paying attention to the moments already around him. He spent more time walking through his company's offices, speaking with employees, and listening to their experiences. He discovered that many people had ideas they had never shared because they believed their voices would not matter. Ethan wanted to change that. But while the company was moving in a new direction, he knew there were still challenges ahead. Changing a culture built over many years required patience, trust, and commitment. One morning, Ethan received a report showing the progress of the new employee programs. The results were positive. More employees were participating. Teams were communicating better. People felt more connected to the company. But as he read through the report, one detail caught his attention. Many employees mentioned that the biggest change was not the programs themselves. It was the feeling that leadership finally cared enough to listen. Ethan sat quietly for a moment. Those words reminded him of Claire. She had done the same thing on the night they met. She had listened. She had noticed. She had cared. Meanwhile, Claire was facing a different kind of challenge in her own life. Her schedule had become more difficult, and balancing work with raising her child required even more effort. She rarely talked about her struggles because she did not want others to worry about her. Instead, she continued moving forward with the same quiet strength she had always shown. One evening, after a long day, Claire sat at her kitchen table reviewing her expenses. The room was quiet except for the sound of her child preparing for the next day. She looked around her small home and felt grateful. It was not a perfect life, but it was a life filled with love. Claire believed that success was not measured by the size of a house or the amount of money in a bank account. Success was measured by the people who felt loved and supported because of you. The next day, Ethan learned that Claire had been helping organize a small neighborhood support project. She had been using her own time to connect families with local resources. Ethan was surprised. Even while managing her own responsibilities, she was still finding ways to help others. He wondered how someone with so many challenges could continue giving so much kindness. Ethan decided to visit the neighborhood project, not as a CEO, but as someone who wanted to understand. When he arrived, he saw Claire speaking with families and volunteers. She was not trying to lead from the front. She was simply working beside everyone else. Ethan watched quietly and realized something important. Claire did not help people because she wanted recognition. She helped because she believed every person deserved care and respect. Later, Ethan thanked her for everything she had done. Claire smiled and said, "You keep making it sound bigger than it is." Ethan shook his head. "Maybe it feels small because kindness is natural to you. But sometimes the things we do without thinking are the things that change someone's life the most." Claire looked at him thoughtfully. She had never considered that her actions could have such an impact. That evening, Ethan returned home with a deeper understanding. He had spent his entire life building something that could be seen. A company. A reputation. A legacy. But Claire had shown him that the most meaningful things were often invisible. Trust. Compassion. Connection. And as Ethan looked toward the future, he knew his journey was no longer about becoming more powerful. It was about becoming more human. The weeks that followed brought a new chapter for Ethan Whitmore and Claire Bennett. Their lives were still completely different, but the distance between their worlds had become smaller. Ethan continued leading Whitmore Global with a new perspective. He still made important decisions, attended meetings, and guided the company toward growth. But now, he looked at success through a different lens. He no longer saw people as numbers on a report. He saw them as individuals with stories, responsibilities, and dreams of their own. One morning, Ethan arrived at the company earlier than usual. He walked through the quiet halls before most employees arrived. The empty offices gave him a moment to reflect. Years ago, he believed that being a great leader meant having every answer. Now he understood that sometimes the greatest leaders were the ones willing to listen and learn. As he entered his office, he found a message from the community project Claire had supported. The message included stories from families who had received assistance and appreciation from volunteers. Ethan read every word carefully. He noticed something familiar in those stories. Many people mentioned how one person's kindness encouraged another person to do the same. It reminded him of Claire. Her actions had created a chain reaction without her ever trying to start one. Meanwhile, Claire continued facing the challenges of everyday life. She balanced her work schedule, her responsibilities as a mother, and the many small tasks that filled each day. Some days were exhausting, but she always found a reason to keep moving forward. Her child's smile, a kind conversation with a neighbor, or a simple moment of peace at home reminded her that life was about more than difficulties. One afternoon, Ethan visited Claire's neighborhood again. This time, he wanted to understand more about the community she cared so much about. He did not arrive with a large team or make a public announcement. He came quietly, hoping to listen. Claire welcomed him with the same warmth she had shown from the beginning. They walked through the neighborhood and talked about ordinary things. They discussed families, dreams, and the importance of creating opportunities for people who often felt unseen. Ethan noticed something powerful about Claire. She never described herself as someone making a difference. She simply believed that helping others was part of being a good person. "You know," Ethan said, "most people spend their lives trying to become important." Claire looked at him with curiosity. "And what do you think?" Ethan smiled. "I think the most important people are often the ones who never try to prove they are important." Claire laughed softly. "That sounds like something you would only say after meeting someone who challenged your way of thinking." Ethan smiled because he knew she was right. Later that evening, Ethan returned home and reflected on their conversation. He thought about the person he was before meeting Claire. He had been successful, respected, and admired. But he had also been distant from the simple moments that gave life meaning. Claire had not changed his company alone. She had changed the way he understood success itself. However, Ethan knew their story was not finished. A new challenge was approaching. Decisions inside Whitmore Global would soon test whether the changes he started could truly last. And for the first time, Ethan was ready to face that challenge with something more powerful than experience or wealth. He was ready to face it with compassion. The challenge Ethan Whitmore expected finally arrived. For weeks, he had been building a different kind of company culture inside Whitmore Global. He had encouraged open conversations, supported new employee programs, and reminded his leadership team that success was created by people, not just numbers. But meaningful change always creates questions, especially in a company that had operated the same way for many years. One morning, Ethan entered a meeting room where several senior executives were waiting. The atmosphere was serious, but calm. A new proposal was being discussed, and some leaders were concerned about the direction of the company. They believed Ethan's focus on people was valuable, but they wondered if it would affect the company's traditional goals. Ethan listened carefully as each person shared their thoughts. The old Ethan might have responded quickly, using his authority to end the discussion. But the person sitting at the table now was different. He allowed everyone to speak. He considered every opinion. Then he shared his perspective. "A company can grow larger without becoming better," Ethan said. "Real success comes when growth and humanity move forward together." His words created a moment of silence. Some executives understood immediately. Others needed more time. But Ethan knew something important. Changing the company was not about convincing everyone overnight. It was about staying consistent with the values he had discovered. Outside the corporate world, Claire Bennett continued living her quiet life. She knew nothing about the conversations happening inside Whitmore Global. She never imagined that a simple act of kindness had become the reason behind major changes in a billion-dollar company. To Claire, Ethan was still the person she had met on a rainy evening. Someone who needed help. Someone who deserved kindness. One afternoon, Claire received a message from Ethan inviting her to a small company gathering. She almost refused because she did not want attention. She was not comfortable being recognized for something she considered ordinary. But Ethan encouraged her to come. "You do not have to say anything," he told her. "I just want you to see what your kindness helped inspire." When Claire arrived, she saw employees from different departments gathered together. The atmosphere was different from what she expected. There was no feeling of distance between leadership and staff. People were sharing stories, laughing, and connecting with one another. Ethan watched Claire take everything in. He could see that she finally understood the impact she had made. Later, Ethan stood beside her and said, "When we first met, you told me anyone would have helped." Claire smiled. "Because I believe that is true." Ethan looked around the room. "Maybe. But not everyone chooses to stop." Claire became quiet. She realized Ethan was not thanking her for one specific action anymore. He was thanking her for reminding him of something he had forgotten. That evening, as Claire returned home, she thought about how unexpected life could be. A small decision made on an ordinary night had connected two completely different worlds. Meanwhile, Ethan looked at the future of Whitmore Global with confidence. The company still had challenges ahead, but he no longer measured success only by achievements. He measured it by the lives touched along the way. And soon, the world would see just how far one simple act of kindness could reach. The days after the company gathering brought a new feeling of hope to everyone at Whitmore Global. Ethan Whitmore had expected questions and uncertainty, but he also saw something more important. He saw people beginning to believe that change was possible. The company was no longer just a place where employees completed tasks. It was becoming a place where people felt connected to a larger purpose. Ethan knew the journey was not finished, but he also knew the foundation had been built. One morning, Ethan arrived at the office and found a letter waiting on his desk. It was not from an investor or a business partner. It was from an employee who had worked at the company for more than 20 years. The letter explained how different the workplace felt and how appreciated many employees now felt. Ethan read the message carefully. A few simple sentences carried more meaning than any business report he had ever received. For years, Ethan had measured success through achievements that could be displayed. Now he was learning that the most meaningful achievements were often the ones that could only be felt. Meanwhile, Claire Bennett continued her everyday life. She still woke up early, prepared her child for the day, and managed the responsibilities that came with being a single mother. Nothing about her routine looked extraordinary from the outside. But Ethan had learned that ordinary moments could create extraordinary results. One afternoon, Claire received a call from Ethan. He wanted to invite her to a special event at Whitmore Global. This time, it was not just a company gathering. It was an event celebrating employees, families, and community members who had helped create positive change. Claire hesitated. She still felt uncomfortable receiving attention. She did not believe she deserved recognition for simply being kind. Ethan understood her hesitation. "Claire, you did not change things because you wanted recognition," he said. "That is exactly why people need to hear your story." When Claire arrived at the event, she was surprised by the atmosphere. The room was filled with employees, families, and community members. People from different backgrounds were sharing conversations and celebrating one another. Ethan welcomed everyone, but he did something unexpected. Instead of talking about company achievements, he talked about a lesson he had learned. "Success is not only about what we build," Ethan said. "It is about who we become while building it." Claire listened quietly from the audience. She never expected those words to come from someone like Ethan. After the speech, Ethan approached her. "I hope you understand now," he said. "Your kindness was never just a small moment. It reminded many people that compassion still matters. Claire smiled. I still think anyone could have done the same. Ethan nodded. Maybe. But you were the person who did. Their conversation was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had experienced together. Two people from completely different worlds had changed each other without planning to. Ethan had gained a new understanding of leadership. Claire had discovered that even the smallest actions could create a lasting impact. As the evening ended, Ethan looked around the room and realized something. He had spent years trying to build a company people would remember. But now he was building something much more valuable. A place where people remembered that they mattered. And it all began with one person choosing to care when no one else stopped. Months passed, and the changes inside Whitmore Global became part of the company's everyday life. What started as one simple conversation between two strangers had grown into something much bigger than Ethan Whitmore ever expected. The company continued to grow, but the meaning behind that growth had changed. Ethan no longer looked at success as something measured only by revenue, expansion, or recognition. He looked at the people who created that success. He looked at the families supported by new programs, the employees who felt heard, and the communities that benefited from a company choosing to care. One morning, Ethan walked through the same headquarters where he had once spent years rushing from one meeting to another. The building looked the same. The glass walls still reflected the city skyline. The offices still carried the energy of ambition and hard work. But something was different. The people inside felt connected. Employees greeted each other with genuine smiles. Leaders took time to listen. Teams worked together with a stronger sense of purpose. Ethan stood quietly for a moment and remembered the person he had been before meeting Claire Bennett. He remembered a man who believed having more meant achieving more. He remembered chasing every milestone, always looking toward the next goal. Then he thought about the rainy evening when a stranger stopped to help him without knowing his name. Claire had never tried to change his life. She had never given a speech or offered a complicated lesson. She had simply shown kindness when it mattered. And that was the lesson Ethan carried with him every day. Meanwhile, Claire continued living the life she always valued. She remained the same person who cared about her family, supported her neighbors, and believed small actions could make a difference. She never became someone different because of Ethan's success. She never wanted attention or praise. Her greatest strength was that she stayed exactly who she was. One afternoon, Ethan visited Claire's neighborhood. They sat together outside a small local cafe, just like ordinary people enjoying a quiet moment. The world saw Ethan as a billionaire CEO. But Claire still saw the person who had needed help that rainy evening. Do you ever think about how everything changed? Ethan asked. Claire smiled. Sometimes. But I still think it started with something simple. Ethan nodded. You are right. The biggest changes often begin with the smallest choices. They sat in silence for a moment, watching people walk through the neighborhood. Ethan realized that his greatest lesson had never come from a business book, a conference, or a powerful person. It came from someone who had nothing to gain by helping him. Years later, people would remember Ethan Whitmore for building a successful company. They would remember his leadership and the changes he created. But Ethan knew the most important part of his story was not the company he built. It was the person he became. Claire had reminded him that kindness did not require wealth. Compassion did not require power. And a single moment of humanity could reach further than anyone could imagine. Because sometimes, the person who changes your life is not the one with the most influence. Sometimes it is the person who simply chooses to care.